Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, February 26, 2019, and time for another show. Tuesday, well, there's not usually much to say about Tuesdays, and as I said in the morning post, today's Tuesday is no exception. But much to come this week. I think we covered it all yesterday, so there's really nothing for us to do today. So let's waste a couple hours together. Well, there's lots to do. There's, it's Election Day in New York City. Anybody listening in far-flung New York City? Turns out, among other things, I guess the election about which no one is talking, but if they were talking, they might be talking, is the one for public advocate, because that involves some personages of note. I have no idea what's going on in that particular election, except for the fact that people are yelling at one another about it, and it's not my election. I can't help you with that one. I can help you with this one. You want to get involved in an election that's not yours? How about that? Here in my actual neck of the woods, this is the part of the woods constituting the neck, here in Loudoun County, we are having a race for Loudoun County Supervisor, our not our most local official if you count the school board, but as I guess the most local generalized legislative body that we have got, the County Board of Supervisors. And running for election as the nominated Democrat for the seat currently held by a Republican. And this is a very purple, trending blue area. And we're voting bluer each day, and there's really no reason for us to be saddled with a Republican representative on our Board of Supervisors. And it's entirely possible to flip this seat. Running for the Democrats in this election, Julie Briskman, who you may remember. I mean, you probably remember her, but I don't know if you remember her name, but you should. She is the woman photographed, a year plus ago, maybe even more at this point, riding her bicycle as Donald Trump made his motorcade exit from his Virginia golf course one Saturday afternoon, presumably. And she was photographed riding her bicycle nearby and flipping him the bird as he went by. And lots of developments following that. She worked for a government contracting company that then leaned on the corporate structure to fire her because presumably they thought that it would hurt them in the contracting business if she were connected to the firm, and it probably would, because Donald Trump is a petty and vindictive kind of person. He would have sought out who did this, and if he found out that a particular contractor employed her, he would look for ways, legal or otherwise, to try and get rid of her or to bring the pressure down on her contractor employer. I actually have no idea whether they suffered at all or whether they really had any current government contracts that Trump could even have tracked down. But anyway, the point is, after losing her job there, she decided, all right, well, the place I need to be, obviously, is in politics and activism where you won't get fired, or shouldn't, or at least in some cases can't get fired for expressing your political opinion. One of the places you could do that, I guess, is in electoral politics, although you do have to watch what you do and what you say there. And she's behaved herself quite admirably since then, including taking up the mantle that everyone is always saying you ought to take up, getting involved in politics. If what is happening in this country is bothering you, why don't you get involved and try and do it better yourself? And don't jump in and declare yourself a candidate for president. Don't jump in necessarily and declare yourself a candidate for Senate or maybe Congress. Some people are able to get away with that one. But start local. And if you want to work your way up, you can go ahead and do that. But start out, get some experience locally, get involved in your local community. So she's doing that. That's the sort of thing we like to support around here, at least in theory. So let's turn it from theory to reality. She's running for County Board of Supervisors here in Loudoun County, Virginia. And she's just kicked off her campaign. She had a fundraiser the other night that I had to miss. I got a nice late invitation and everything. I'm a local guy, you see. And I know her. She's her son currently in Scouts with my younger son. She's a person about town in general. And very nice, and not always flipping the bird at everybody, so you don't have to worry about that. She knows how to behave herself in public. And, what she did wasn't out of bounds for Donald Trump, or really any president for that matter. Anyway, she had a fundraiser the other night. I had to miss it. It was my wife's birthday the same day. I think she would understand that. Locally famous, newly elected congressperson for the district, Jennifer Wexton, whose name you might have heard for defeating Barbara Comstock and purging Congress of Comstocks. She was on hand to endorse and help her kick off her fundraising. And you can participate because, online being what it is. She's got a crowdpack.com page, which you can find by Googling or use your favorite search engine if you prefer something else. Googling Julie Briskman, Juli. Briskman is, of course, just as it sounds, Briskman. And for supervisor, that's the job she's after. And you'll find her page pretty easily. And she's looking to raise money. And I hope that you'll join in. And I see that a couple of you already have. As a matter of fact, names that I recognize from my own Twitter feed and her own team have showed up here. And it's been very nice and gratifying to see. And I've been tweeting this out from time to time, and I probably keep doing it too. I sent her a couple of bucks myself a while ago, although I didn't do it through CrowdPack, and maybe one of these days I should think about kicking in another contribution just so that my name is sitting up there, although I'd like to do it anonymously. But I don't know, maybe it would spark some more contributions. But if you're looking for the whole... or if you're looking to avoid using Google, like I said, it's at CrowdPack, CrowdPac.com. She's Julie Briskman. You could probably go to their page. I could read you the URL, but does that help anybody? CrowdPack.com/campaigns/ a couple of 388042/Julie-Briskman. I don't think so. Not a real super easy way of dealing with it. I'm sure there's a million ways to get yourself to that page, and I appreciate it. Those of you who have made your way there or are thinking about it, it would be nice. I'll be happier and living in a bluer town and broadcasting from a bluer town, and having a better outlook on life. You want to do something for me, and you're sick and tired of sending me money, or you already have, and what the hell else do you want from me? Or you say, I love your show, hate contributing to you. I'm not really sure why you would think that, but would love to contribute to better government in your area. I don't know. That could happen. And besides which, it's always easier, I think, to ask for money for other people than it is to ask for yourself. So go ahead and contribute to Julie Briskman and help out, my neighbors and me, and we'll all be happy. You want to contribute to somebody else who isn't me, but who is related? Let's say Netroots Radio could always use donations as well. I will, in the podcast, bring you pre-recorded messages begging for money for myself, but Netroots Radio also in need of support constantly because we're constantly bringing you the news and opinions and updates and voices from our audience and from among the Daily Coast contributing editors, etc. And as you know, everything costs money these days. That's just the way it is. All right. Just wanted to let you know. I just thought of I'm going to have to do another promotion for this on Twitter at some point, and so I'll now that I say we can flip this seat, and it's perfect because here's a picture of Julie Briskman flipping the bird to Donald Trump. So flipping, that'll be all right. I've ruined the joke for those of you who will see the tweet later, But if you don't want me to make that tweet because it's too corny, then you better get in there and donate money to one of 3 people that I just mentioned. I guess I'm extorting money from you, and it could be anybody. All right, there you have it. It is Tuesday. It's a solo situation today, so we might as well get right to the news, things that are going on today. Look at this. There's a business before the House of Representatives today. I understand from Steny Hoyer, he emailed me personally. Not really. The Majority Leader's office they'll email you too if you sign up for it. The Daily Leader, which will tell you each evening what votes they expect the next day in the House of Representatives. And today, the House will meet at 10 o'clock. Legislative business beginning at 12 o'clock. Yes, that's 2 hours of business that isn't legislative in front of our our second ranking, the lower house of the Congress, our second most important legislative body. We'll spend 2 hours, I guess, giving 1-minute speeches and taking care of various bits of housekeeping. And then at noon, they begin work on House Joint Resolution 46, or HJ Res 46, as the cool people say. That is the House resolution in disapproval of President Trump's, I hate to say it, but it's apparently true, President Trump's declaration of a national emergency on the southern border. This is the one authored by Representative Castro. And we have the text here. This is an interesting development yesterday. I saw people tweeting that, Republicans were saying that when they were being asked about whether or not they might vote in support of this resolution against the declaration of emergency, that they hadn't had a chance to review the legislation. And so they weren't really sure exactly what their position on it was going to be, but I'll review it and, get back to you. And they won't really get back to anybody. But it's important to note that this resolution is, it's about as short and sweet as it could get. Susan Davis was the one whose tweet I read. Let's see. Susan Davis covers Congress for NPR, according to her bio here. And she tweeted out, one reason House Republicans are citing to oppose the resolution to overturn President Trump's national emergency declaration is that they haven't had time to review the bill. And she notes, same tweet, it is 1 page and about 70 to 80 words. And it even includes a link to it right there in the tweet. Let's see. There's another tweet that goes along with it that says, as a quote from House Rules Ranking Minority Member Tom Cole, a Republican of Oklahoma, also a senior appropriator, whose authority, therefore, is being usurped by Trump in his declaration. And so you would think he would have a real interest in protecting his prerogative as a appropriator, but apparently not. I do not understand the haste with which the majority is pushing this disapproval resolution through. We've had no time to review the bill, and no committee has held a hearing or marked it up. Well, let me just say that it's not necessary. The Rude Pundit actually made that point as well as anybody by basically including the entirety of the resolution in a tweet. It is tweetable. He did make 1 or 2 abbreviations here. But I will read you the full text of the bill. It's on display. So what is it? HJ Res 46, we decided? Right. Here it is. Joint resolution relating to a national emergency declared by the President on February 15th, 2019. Here is the text, though, of the bill. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives. I don't know why he started with the Senate. This is the House's resolution, after all, but maybe that's the boilerplate. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. That's the standard beginning. That Pursuant to Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act, parentheses, 50 U.S. Code 1622, end parentheses, the national emergency declared by the finding of the President on February 15, 2019, in Proclamation 9844, parentheses, which means it can be found at 84 Federal Register 4949, end parentheses, is hereby terminated. That's it. The end. 7 lines long. Resolved, blah, 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 blah. That's 2 of the lines. Pursuant to Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act, the national emergency declared by the finding of the President on February 15, 2019 in Proclamation 9844 is hereby terminated. Period. End of bill. That's it. That's the whole thing. We haven't had a chance to review it. Here it is. Review it. It's as clear a resolution of disapproval, as clean as resolution of disapproval as is possible. By the way, that should mean that if anything but an unequivocal yes vote, including yes on motions to proceed to the thing, yes on cloture should the issue come up, but I guess it's really, it can't, it's not, I had understood that the resolutions of disapproval were not subject to filibuster, and so it may be that it's time limited in the debate, and so you won't need any votes on cloture. But at any rate, anything other than a vote in favor of moving and adopting for final passage this resolution from Susan Collins reveals her as a liar. She said she would vote for a resolution, a clean resolution, rejecting the proclamation, and here it is. It couldn't possibly get any cleaner than that. The rude pundit, as I said, fit it all in a single tweet. He just took out the parentheses, and I think he abbreviated this to resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the USA in Congress assembled instead of United States of America. The rest of it fits. Resolved, pursuant to Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act, the national emergency declared by the finding of the President, and blah, 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 hereby terminated. By the way, the finding of the President on February 15, 2019 in Proclamation 9844 brings us to another story. It reminds me of another proclamation, 9843. Actually, I don't have that in front of me, but neither do I have in front of me Proclamation 9844. Again, I have seen the text. It is posted in the White House's blog. The question is, has anybody else seen it? And we don't really, I guess for purposes of dealing with this, maybe don't actually need to see it since we're just going to reject it. And of course, he's going to veto it. And it looks like, so far, it looks like we'll fall short on override numbers, but I guess we'll get some indication. It's hard to tell from what happens today, but I don't think anybody expects there to be 2/3 in favor of it in both houses, or even either one of the houses. And the situation may change, or people can vote yes on it now, knowing that it will be vetoed, but then change their minds and say, the President has been firm on it, and he believes it's his authority, and I think the courts will take care of it, so I will vote no on an override. I'd like it. I want to oppose it, but I would like the courts to decide it. You might find people voting yes on the resolution now and no on any override votes. But the story I wanted to move on to is that, once again, I don't think anybody has seen the President sign or has seen a signed copy of Proclamation 9844, allegedly dated February 15th, 2019. And I put it that way because, sure enough, it turns out, and Greg was able to spot this yesterday and sent it to me, and now where did I put it? There it is. Actually, I had seen somebody else tweet it too, but not until Greg had mentioned it did I find this thing. A report from Chris Geidner at BuzzFeed News. You all thought I was crazy, although, I don't know, maybe actually we're beyond that, or you think I'm beyond crazy, or many of you have adopted the same sort of craziness. You've listened to me for a while, seen me on Twitter complaining that with Donald Trump, you just never know whether the things he has proclaimed, whether in the Rose Garden or on Twitter or at presidential prayer breakfasts or whatever, you never know whether they are backed up with the appropriate paperwork to make them effective or whether they actually ever happened at all. The other day, we documented a number of instances in which the president had declared something to be the case or insisted that he had already issued this order, and he simply hadn't. And I think we're still waiting to find out whether there's any paperwork backing up his insistence that he had already ordered FEMA to cut California off in disaster relief funds until they started raking their forests. That I think everyone is still looking for that one, and I guess FEMA at least still operating as though it never happened, which is a good thing, because sometimes it goes the other way. The important impacted part of the government begins behaving as though the proclamation did happen, and we're not sure that it did. Chris Geidner responded to my thread recounting the number of times and instances in which this had happened when I raised the question of Matthew Whitaker's purported appointment as acting attorney general, because, one, it was never entirely clear that that was fully legal, for one thing, but never clear that it had been legally executed in any way, because for whatever reason, the White House was refusing to show the paperwork. Once again, no one had seen him sign it. No one had seen a signed copy of this supposed directive naming Whitaker to the job. And every time people actually asked for it, and I was amazed that people did think to ask for it, the White House said, the dog ate it. We don't know where it is. They actually declined to provide it. And Geithner had to pursue this thing through a Freedom of Information Act request. And as of last week, when we were complaining about the number of instances in which the president simply bypassed all the necessary paperwork and willed things into existence, despite the fact that sometimes the responsible federal agencies refused to go along with him in willing it into existence, there was no response. He still hadn't gotten anything. But now he's got it. This story posted on February 25th, yesterday. Trump's memo appointing Matthew Whitaker raises questions about when he actually took over DOJ. Now that they have what purports to be the document naming Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general, and again, I don't know that it is. This is simply the document that they provided in response to the Freedom of Information Act request. I don't know if they did that job correctly or whether they didn't fudge anything along the way. But they finally did respond, but it took this long, February 25th. The White House and Justice Department had previously declined to turn over the memo, for some strange reason, which was obtained by BuzzFeed News in response to a Freedom of Information Act request. So here's the body of the piece. A newly released document. Why is it newly released? Why did we have to wait so long? Regarding former acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker's appointment, shows that at the earliest, President Donald Trump authorized Whitaker to lead the Justice Department a day later, at the earliest, a day later than officials previously said was the case. That doesn't sound like that big of a deal, although even if that were the case, that, okay, I didn't appoint him on this date, but I appointed him on the following date, why the delay? Why the reluctance to show the paperwork? That is a real puzzle for me. I can't figure out, unless it's just simply like I'm literally just trolling, like Stephen Miller is saying, I have the paperwork, it's in my hand. Just tell them that we don't know where it is or that we refuse to provide it, just to make them steamed and make them puzzled and scratch their heads for however long we feel like teasing them, and then give them the thing, which is just, well, it's not normal, and really it's clear indication that these people don't belong anywhere near public office. But For whatever reason, people don't think of it that way, but they really should. White House and Justice Department officials previously had repeatedly declined to make public a copy of Trump's memorandum, funny enough, given the story we discussed yesterday and Trump's idea of what memoranda are really worth in the world. But they declined to make public a copy of Trump's memorandum designating Whitaker the acting attorney general this past November. It's been some time. November to all of November, basically, December, January, and pretty much all of February. 4 months they have refused to show this document. And it's no longer than the resolution disapproving of his declaration of national emergency, really. So the White House and Justice Department had previously repeatedly declined to make public a copy of the memorandum. A copy of the document, now obtained by BuzzFeed News in response to a Freedom of Information Act request, suggests why that was the case. There's some hint, although really it just doesn't go that far in explaining it. The document, they say, raises several questions about the timing of and process involved in Whitaker's appointment. What sorts of questions might it raise? Well, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, whose departure as head of the DOJ was forced by Trump, resigned by way of an undated letter. Did you know that his letter was undated? Made public November 7th, 2018. Trump tweeted that afternoon that Matthew Whitaker, Sessions' chief of staff, would be taking over as the acting attorney general until a replacement was confirmed. You all remember the basics of that, although you might not remember the date. So it's important to note that was the date, November 7th, and that he resigned in an undated letter, which is unusual, not usually the case. We'll get into the nitty-gritty details next. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with Chris Greidner's report in BuzzFeed News on his article, Trump's Memo Appointing Matthew Whitaker raises questions about when he actually took over the DOJ. So when we last left off, we had noted that Sessions departs from the Department of Justice, having been forced to resign by Donald Trump, resigns by way of an undated letter that was made public on November 7th. Trump tweets on that afternoon, November 7th, that Whitaker will take over. The obtained memorandum, dated November 8th, does not make clear when Sessions' resignation took effect or when Whitaker actually began serving as acting attorney general. It may seem unimportant, and maybe by itself it would be. And if all of this, all it really was that, look, he resigned on November 7th and Whitaker was appointed on November 8th, that wouldn't be anything too awful, although why you wouldn't simply disclose it and say that, I am not sure. But there's more to it. But really, honestly, when you resign, there should be a date on the letter, and the fact that on the same day the president already was tweeting that Whitaker would be taking over, why the delay, considering how brief the memorandum is, why the delay in getting the thing typed up and filed? Why couldn't it have been filed on November 7th? After all, why have a gap at all? Why leave any questions? what sorts of questions would there be? Remember that we read, a couple of weeks ago about various lawsuits involving the Department of Justice, and in which the plaintiffs named the Attorney General, or the purported acting Attorney General, as the defendant along with the Department of Justice. And this happens all the time whenever you're filing federal suits. That happens a lot. You name the cabinet secretary in charge of the department you're suing, not in their personal capacity, but as their head of the department. Somebody has to be taking personal responsibility for the action that you're suing about. And people who were suing the Department of Justice needed to know, who am I suing? Well, who am I naming for this? When I planned on filing this suit, when we began on this suit, it was clear enough that I would be suing Jefferson Beauregard Sessions. Is he the third also? Everybody seems to be the third down in the South anyway. But that we're suing Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. We now need to make sure that we're suing the right person, or if your suit arises later, either if you sue earlier before Sessions resigns and then he's out and you haven't quite filed your suit and you're getting ready to finish it up, you're going to want the name of the acting Attorney General in there. If your suit is already pending, you may also want to make a motion of some sort noting that, especially if you're expecting your court date soon, that Matthew Whitaker, in his purported capacity as acting Attorney General, is the target of your suit. And certainly if you're filing new, you're going to want to do that too. And a couple of plaintiffs used that question to begin to ask the question that newspaper reporters were not having answered for them. Is there a real paper trail establishing that Whitaker really is the acting Attorney General? And that carried other implications as well. Remember that according to the law, by default, had Trump not taken any other action, Rod Rosenstein would have been according to the statutory scheme of succession, he would have been left as the highest ranking member of the Justice Department and would therefore have moved into the acting Attorney General role, and that Trump had to find authority elsewhere in order to bypass Rosenstein for whatever reason and put someone else in place. The Attorney General's chief of staff is not ordinarily in line for succession to the acting Attorney General position. He had to find authority elsewhere to do it and go out of his way to make Whitaker acting AG, if in fact he ever did that. And therefore, you'll want to see the paperwork on this. You can't simply rely on, well, everybody knows that when the Attorney General resigns, the next highest person in the Justice Department, according to this statutory scheme, simply becomes acting Attorney General. That wasn't happening. And so it was important that there be an official piece of paperwork somewhere signed by the president saying that they were going to deviate from the statutory scheme and offering the authority for that. Now, you want to do that right away so that there's no question and everybody knows who to turn to for answers about what's happening at the Department of Justice. But it didn't happen right away. He announced it right away. That is, Trump tweeted it on the 7th, but he didn't put it down on paper, allegedly, until the 8th. And that doesn't seem like such a bad thing. You might say, well, it was the afternoon and people might be on their way out the door and you don't want to stop somebody at 5 p.m., even though hardly anybody gets out of work at 5 p.m. these days. You don't want to stop anybody at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. on their way out the door and say, could you just type up this memo because I don't want there to be any question in the future about whether or not we had an acting Attorney General for these 6 hours or 8 or 10 or 12 hours between closing time and opening time tomorrow. Right? You don't want to do that to somebody if you don't have to. But it's important. It's the government. So you might make somebody stay. Well, again, that becomes important later on. You'll see what I'm talking about. So they leave this gap at minimum. There's now a document finally revealed that says on November 8th, this person was named to the job. Ordinarily, in a real administration, you would then be able to point to that. Of course, in a real administration would have pointed to it on November 8th. They would have said, you're asking where the paperwork is? Why? Okay. Why are you asking that? Oh, well, in the future, the answer would be, well, because Donald Trump always lied about that stuff and very often said that somebody had been appointed and they hadn't been, or that he was declaring this or that to be the case as under his presidential authority, and then he didn't do that, or it was all garbage. He was just lying, or he forgot to do the paperwork, or he doesn't know how to do the paperwork. So we ask. That's how you would respond to that in the future. And a future administration would say, well, okay, understandable. Hang on a second. Let me look through my box here. Okay, let me type this in. Clickety-clackety. And here you go. Here's a copy of the presidential order. Oh, well, this doesn't have his signature on it. True, this is just the text. I mean, really? You want the original? I have to get that from the archivist of the United States at this point. It's been a couple of months, but they have it in a box somewhere, and a system whereby if I call them and tell them you need it, we can get it. Do you want it? Why? And again, ordinarily you would say, well, I guess now you would say, because again, Trump cheated about all these things and now we have to just make sure about everybody. Oh, okay. That's never happened before Trump, but okay. And then you would get the thing. And who knows, maybe it would even take a couple of weeks for the archivist staff to get around to your request and pull it. But this is 4 months. Now, with Trump, all we can say now that we've got this thing is, well, the president's memorandum naming Whitaker to the job is dated November 8th. Does that mean he wrote it on November 8th? With a normal president? Yes, it does. With Donald Trump? No, it doesn't. It means that somebody put November 8th, 2018 on this paper at some point. Could have been November 7th. Could have been November 8th. Could have been November 9th. Could have been November 25th. Could have been October 15th, for all we know. Yeah, we're going to get this ready. We're going to fire Sessions. It could have been any time. We don't know. It just purports to be November 8th. Again, sort of the difference between difference between evidence and proof, right? Can you prove that he was named acting attorney general on November 8th? Yes, here is a memorandum dated November 8th saying that he was appointed to the job. Okay, is that proof? Ordinarily, we take it to be proof, but as it stands with this president, it's merely evidence that tends to prove that he's telling the truth about it being November 8th. But when you get right down to it, all I have is a piece of paper that could have been post-dated, could have been, retroactively dated. I don't really know what happened here. And in fact, I've never even authenticated the document. I'm not 100% sure that's his signature. And again, in normal situations, you would say you're being a pedantic a-hole. You're going to get fined you're going to get sanctioned by the court for being so ridiculous about these things. But in a Trump case, you got grounds for this. All right. Am I overdoing it? Am I crazy? We'll see. Remember, as Chris reminds us here in the next paragraph, Whitaker's appointment was not automatic. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein would have become the acting Attorney General under law by default if Sessions left, but Trump took advantage of another law, and it's linked here. I guess a report about how he did it, and maybe we'll poke into it. I don't know. But he took advantage of another law that allows the president to name certain people as acting officers for a period of time. Actually, somewhat curious about that. This is another Geithner article. Yes, it is. From December 9th, 2018, entitled Matthew Whitaker is acting AG now because Congress gave in to Bill Clinton. That is sort of interesting. Is it minor? It's no minor read here. What's the subheader? Does this explain it? Whitaker's installation at the Justice Department has been painted as another Trump effort to influence investigations against him and his campaign, but it would not have been possible without changes in law pushed by Democrats. So both sides somehow. Just sort of curious about that. Oh, look at whose name pops up in here. The fight over the legality of Donald Trump's appointment of acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker began with the death of J. Edgar Hoover nearly 5 decades ago, and it won't necessarily end with the expected nomination of William P. Barr to become the next Attorney General. After Hoover died, Democrats began to fear that by naming a loyalist to one of the nation's top law enforcement roles in an acting capacity, then President Richard Nixon would be able to receive information about and potentially influence an ongoing investigation of the president and his allies without even needing to seek Senate confirmation of his appointee. The executive branch defended the appointment, beginning a 25-year fight that led to Congress pressing forward legislation in 2 different decades aimed at restricting who could be appointed to acting positions and how long they could serve. In 1998, however, the Clinton administration and allies on Capitol Hill pushed back on the second bill, fighting for more flexibility in whom presidents could appoint and getting a legislative change that last month, November of 2018, was used by the Trump administration in making Whitaker the acting Attorney General. There's a long backstory, I guess, to how they got to that. I would recommend, I guess, that we read that some other time and head back to the main point before we lose it, that Whitaker's appointment wasn't automatic, that Trump used this other authority that it was arranged for by the Clinton administration, approved by Congress, to allow the president to name someone other than the next ranking person or someone in the statutory scheme as acting Attorney General. So, Sessions ceremoniously, it says here, usually we say unceremoniously, but it was ceremonious apparently. He ceremoniously left DOJ early on the evening of November 7th, and the Justice Department released a statement from, quote, acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, unquote. That's what it says here in the piece. Shortly thereafter. The memorandum, signed by Trump appointing Whitaker to the role, however, was not dated until the next day, November 8th. And here's where things get weird. And the Department of Justice's Executive Secretariat, that's the office with the, quote, responsibility for controlling and managing correspondence emanating to and from top DOJ officials. The Executive Secretariat did not mark the receipt of the memorandum until 11:59 p.m. on November 13th, oddly enough. So 11:59 p.m. marked received. It's clearly not a matter of not wanting to keep people past 5 p.m. and not a matter of not wanting to keep them past 5 p.m. on the 7th or the 8th or the 9th or the 10th or the 11th or the 12th or the 13th, because it wasn't until the 13th at 11:59 p.m. that they said, okay, we actually now finally have the paperwork. After all, appointing Matthew Whitaker, or allegedly appointing Matthew Whitaker as acting Attorney General. I'm just curious, November of 2018, what was the 13th? What day of the week? I mean, 11:59 p.m. That seems pretty crazy. That's a Tuesday night. So as between just before midnight, Tuesday, Wednesday, in the 3rd week of November. It's like a week from, a little more than a week from Thanksgiving, they finally received this thing. So at the minimum, even if they dated the thing on November 8th, even if they had dated it November 7th, it's a week late, right? So on November 7th, Sessions resigns. On November 8th, this memo is written. The memo takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 full days, 11:59 p.m., to arrive and be noted at the Executive Secretariat. Even 5 days doesn't seem like a whole lot. But paired with the fact that they refused to show the paperwork and refused to give any reason for refusing to show the paperwork for 4 months, and only then come up with this weird, hinky-looking document that isn't very substantive on its face and is in response to an undated resignation letter and is dated the next day but disappears for 5 days and gets logged in at 11:59 p.m., there's a little bit of weirdness going on here. Notably, the piece continues, on November 8th, Whitaker, along with Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, issued the asylum rule that preceded Trump's November 9th move, seeking to limit asylum applications from along the southern border. So, now things begin to become important. The 5-day gap, you can see more things going wrong than with a 1-day gap, because it's 5 times longer. And you might think, well, maybe it took them a couple of days to get accustomed and measure the drapes and everything. What could have happened in the 5 days? The problem is that when you step into a role like acting attorney general, you're going to be called upon to make rulings and make decisions and issue orders that are official, that people have to act on. And you have to know, if you're being called upon to act on those orders, whether they are validly issued. And apparently, there could be some question now. I don't know. On November 8th, Whitaker issues asylum rules. Did it happen? What time did it happen? Did it happen before or after the White House alleges that they drafted and signed the November 8th appointment memo? Does that matter? What does the executive secretariat think? Does the executive secretariat feel that Whitaker is only acting attorney general once they've logged and received the memorandum of appointment? Or are they willing to make it retroactive to the date that the White House alleges they wrote the memorandum? I don't know. And then if so, I guess, did it happen before or after the order was issued, the asylum rule was issued? On the morning of November 14th, after they received it, I guess, DOJ released a memorandum supporting the legality of Whitaker's appointment. And now that might be really interesting. Now, why on November 14th do they finally issue the thing? Apparently, DOJ is scratching its head from the 7th to the 14th. They spend a week trying to finalize their thinking on whether or not this appointment is even legal. And one wonders then, where does the delay come from? Was it a 5-day delay in the White House sending the memorandum over? Was there a 5-day delay writing the memorandum, and once they finished, they said, it looks bad that it's 5 days already, put November 8th on it. Although at that point, why don't you just put November 7th on it? I don't know, whatever. Next question, logging this thing at the executive secretary at 11:59? Really? On November 13th? Is it because they know that on the morning of November 14th, they are going to issue the memorandum supporting the legality? Are they telling the secretariat, hold that letter, don't log it until we're sure this appointment will work? When we have our memo on the legality of the appointment done, then I want you to log it. Let me know that you've logged it. And next order of business will be releasing the memorandum supporting the legality. And, if that's the case, then I guess it's best that they at least went ahead and did their homework and dotted the I's and crossed the T's and everything. But it does raise some other questions about why would it, is that complicated that it takes a week to figure out whether or not it's even legal? And if the Trump people puzzle over it for a week, there's a pretty good bet that they did a bad job and it's not legal. And what happened in the meantime? What else besides the issuance of an asylum rule with Homeland Security might also possibly be of questionable legality and provenance? So, On the morning of the 14th, DOJ releases their memorandum supporting the legality of Whitaker's appointment. In it, the head of the Office of Legal Counsel, Assistant Attorney General Stephen Engel, did not provide specifics about the timing of Whitaker's appointment, only saying that Trump designated Whitaker as acting Attorney General after Sessions resigned. We don't know how long after. We don't really know if it was after. He just says that it was after. Again, you got to question everything. The same day, White House spokesperson Raj Shah used similar language, telling BuzzFeed News, quote, after accepting the resignation of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the president signed a memorandum addressed to Matthew Whitaker, directing him to perform the functions and duties of the office of Attorney General until the position is filled by an appointment or subsequent designation, unquote. The next week, Shah declined to provide a copy of the memorandum or any additional information, writing that it was, quote, relevant to ongoing litigation. It's an odd thing to say. I mean, I know they fall back on that all the time. We can't discuss an ongoing case. We can't discuss an ongoing investigation. We can't discuss ongoing litigation, however they phrase it. And there was, at some point, litigation about whether or not the appointment was legal. You see that there had to be a memo from OLC to begin with. So there could have been or litigation going on, but that's not really it's going to be an exhibit in the litigation. There's no point in saying I can't give you a copy of the memorandum because it's relevant to ongoing litigation. I mean, so's the Constitution. Does that mean you can't, quote the Constitution while this litigation is ongoing? That's just, I don't know. It seems ridiculous. BuzzFeed News subsequently filed a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain the memorandum, and now they've actually got it, and hence this story. But the linked story for declining to provide a copy is a November 20th piece, also by Geithner, the one that raised this question in our minds in the first place. The White House won't say when Trump formally named Matthew Whitaker as acting Attorney General. Remember, this is the week after Sessions resigned. And this memo is allegedly dated November 8th. This article is November 20th. So when does it say when he asks the question? I assume that he asks him on the 19th or thereabouts. And the memo that has turned up was written on the 8th, was logged by the Secretariat on the 13th, a week after the Executive Secretariat has gotten the letter, and a week after the OLC has issued its memo supporting the legality of Whitaker's appointment. The White House is still saying, I'm not going to give you a copy of that because it's relevant to ongoing litigation. In addition to the big questions of when Sessions' tenure formally ended and when Whitaker's formally began, the obtained memorandum also leaves unclear when DOJ was formally notified of Whitaker's appointment and why the Executive Secretariat's notation signifies that DOJ did not receive the appointment memorandum until late at night, November 13th. Neither a DOJ spokesperson nor the White House spokespeople responded to questions about the memorandum and the timing of Sessions' resignation and Whitaker's ascension to acting Attorney General. And there is a copy, complete with the signature, of what's supposedly the memo in question here. And there's up there in the right upper left-hand corner, the stamp, received, Department of Justice, Executive Secretariat, 2018, November 13th, PM 11:59. Right before, I don't know what, the coach turns back into a pumpkin, I guess. On White House stationery, dated November 8th, memorandum for Matthew George Whitaker, Chief of Staff, Department of Justice. Here's the entirety of this very dangerous, very super secret, very detailed memorandum, which isn't binding because Donald Trump says so. It reads, pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, including Section 3345A of Title V U.S. Code, You are directed to perform the functions and duties of the office of Attorney General until the position is filled by appointment or subsequent designation. And then signature, Donald Trump. I assume that's his signature. That looks like the mess that he usually makes on pieces of paper and then flashes around. It doesn't have his name typed under it or anything. This is a very hastily prepared memo, prepared the day after the firing or the resignation / firing of Sessions, prepared the day after the tweeted naming of Whitaker, and prepared 5 days before it's actually logged and 4 months before it's actually released and acknowledged. No one can explain to me why that might be the case. That's the end of the article. And I'm thinking now maybe we want to click on Chris Geidner's name here and see whether he's got anything new since then. But I guess not. Any sort of updates or anything? No. I guess it's just hanging out there as a mystery. But it's important to check this stuff out. And now there's going to be cases. I mean, people were presumably deported in the period during which the papers are missing, and things of, not just deportations, but various things that the Attorney General is responsible for were ordered and executed based on nothing but a presidential tweet that this guy was supposedly the president's choice for acting Attorney General. And of course, the legality of that appointment hadn't been worked out yet. But even if you were willing to assume that it was legal, you'd want to see the paper that goes along with it. I mean, you can only make these assumptions if you're also assured that all of the brass tacks are being taken care of behind the scenes. We make a lot of assumptions based on that stuff. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That's a lot of time spent on something that could be a very minor point, but for somebody it may end up being a major point. I mean, what if you, what if you or someone you know was deported based on a determination and an order from the supposed acting Attorney General during a period in which even the Department of Justice itself has not become officially aware of the president's desire to name this person as acting Attorney General. It sounds like he meant it. He tweeted it, but, what do you do if that's your job, to determine whether or not something is official? This whole line of questioning, at least this last round of the line of questioning, began with Daniel Dale noting that the president, I don't remember whether he tweeted or he just, verbally threatened this somewhere. I should look that up now. I can't remember exactly how he made the statement, but the whole inquiry began with Daniel Dale noting that the president had said, I've already ordered FEMA to do this thing, and FEMA is of the opinion that no, he never did. They never got paperwork on it, so they were proceeding as though it hadn't happened. And I would assume that among good civil servants, the default often, I hope always, is to say, well, let's not do anything until we get the paper. It's important to get, to have the declaration signed by the president, and then we can act. That's the triggering event here. The president's signed order reaches us, or we are assured that the president has signed such an order, and although it's in transit to us, we are assured by the secretary of this department that it's on its way. Or even, I think you could even forgive people in most administrations. We just don't think that the president and the White House would tell us that this had happened if it hadn't. Whereas with this White House and this president, it happens all the time. So you would hope that civil servants would wait to see the paperwork. FEMA waited to see the paperwork, and they are carrying on as though the order was never issued, because as far as they're concerned, it wasn't issued. And I don't know whether there's any generalized assumption across government that this is the way it should be. I think probably there's lots of leeway because of our 200-plus year history of having normal presidents who do take care of paperwork. And you ordinarily won't find yourself in trouble acting immediately on orders of which you've become aware through generally reliable sources. But I don't know. I'm not really sure how the DOJ acted. We don't really know, and I guess we'd have to try and find out and do some real reporting and do some further Freedom of Information Act requests to find out what actions were taken on behalf of the Department of Justice, purportedly by authority of the purported acting Attorney General, from November 7th, the evening of November 7th, through the entirety of November 13th. Did DOJ, is there more besides the issuance of the asylum rules that was undertaken according to this authority? Or and I guess just as interesting would be, are there other instances in which the Department of Justice declined to take such action until they had, at the Executive Secretariat, logged the proper paperwork? I'd be really interested to know if there were some things for which they proceeded and some things for which they refused to proceed. We'll probably never know, because there's too much else going on, much of which will be the subject of discussion on Capitol Hill this week. It is already the subject of discussion by Maggie Haberman, whom you all trust implicitly, I am sure, in the New York Times. By the way, before I begin on that reading, I will note the comment from the mighty OCD, who says quite correctly that memorandum purportedly naming Matthew Whitaker as purported Attorney General may very well have been written February 24th, 2019, and only in reaction to an internal deadline that they set for themselves, saying we've got to respond to this Freedom of Information Act request, and we've run out of dumb time. That is, we've run out of time that we can blame on just plain bureaucratic red tape and dumbness for delaying this thing. Somebody craft up a memo that whatever says Matthew Whitaker gets named. Somebody look up the authority, or for that matter, somebody make up the authority, type it on a thing here. Don't bother putting a signature block for Trump. Just photocopy his signature from something else and put it on there, although ordinarily that's a signature would be over a signature block, and you could just reproduce that too. But this comes without a signature block. What date should we put on it? Hold on a second. Let me look in Wikipedia and find out when Sessions resigned. Sessions resigned, according to Wikipedia, on the 7th, though there's no actual date on the paperwork. And so there you go. You gotta leave it at that. The Wikipedia says the 7th, so date it the 8th, without thinking, oh, maybe we should date it the 7th, the same day that he resigned. Now I'm kind of curious, actually. If I were going through this exercise myself, and you were looking for, let's see, Jeff Sessions Wikipedia entry, there it is, and then you would want to go to, let's see, the section here. All right, 84th United States Attorney General, February 9th, 2017 to November 7th, 2018. That's in the little block underneath his picture. Is there, I guess, let me go to the Attorney General section and then the resignation section. On November 7th, 2018, the day after the 2018 midterm elections, Jeff Sessions resigned as Attorney General at the President's request. There's 3 footnotes. Here's a copy of the resignation letter is in here too. It is, in fact, undated in this copy. At your request, I'm submitting my resignation. It's curious that he didn't date the thing. But, well, whatever. It was hastily prepared, I'm sure. So then you would say, all right, put in the authority by which Trump names Whitaker. Right? Let me see. So where's this one here? The letter is at the bottom, right? Section 3345A, Title 5. So let's just look that. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I think they did it right. And this is the assumption that most people make. I don't know. It's probably there. No one would just lie, would they? Trump would just lie. So 5 U.S. Code 3345A. 5 U.S. Code Section 3345A. Let's just look. There it is. 5 U.S. Code Section 3345, acting officer. I'll get this pop-up out of my way here. If an officer of an executive agency, including the Executive Office of the President, and other than the Government Accountability Office, whose appointment to office is required to be made by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, dies, resigns, or is otherwise unable to perform the functions and duties of the office, 1. The first assistant to the office of such officer shall perform the functions and duties of the office temporarily in an acting capacity subject to the time limitations of Section 3346. That would tend to say Rod Rosenstein takes over. A2 says, notwithstanding paragraph 1, A1, the president and only the president may direct a person who serves in an office for which appointment is required to be made by the president by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to perform the functions and duties of the vacant office temporarily in an acting capacity subject to the time limitations of Section 3346. That also doesn't cover us. This is would have allowed Trump to direct some other Senate-confirmed official to take over, and Whitaker isn't that. Section A3, notwithstanding paragraph 1, the president and only the president may direct an officer or employee of such executive agency to perform the functions and duties of the vacant office temporarily in an acting capacity subject to time limitations of Section 3346 if, and this is where we're supposed to be here. So really it's subject to the authority of 5 U.S. Code Section 3345A3. Seems to be the operative section. Now, there are some ifs here. If A, capital A, during the 365-day period preceding the date of death, resignation, or beginning of inability to serve of the applicable officer, that would be Sessions, in the year before he resigned, up to November 7th, 2017. If during that period, the officer or employee served in a position in such agency for not less than 90 days, and, so he meets that, B, the rate of pay for the position described under subparagraph A, that we just read, is equal to or greater than the minimum rate of pay payable for a position at GS 15 of the general schedule. Wow. I don't know. Let's see. Do we unpack this? The rate of pay for the position described, that would be the Attorney General, is equal to or greater than the minimum rate of pay available for a position of GS 15. That seems almost certainly to be true also. Wow. Okay. There's more. There's a B and a C. There's a lot to this. Notwithstanding subsection A1, a person may not serve as an acting officer for an office under this section if, during the 365-day period preceding the date of death, resignation, or beginning of or inability to serve, such a person did not serve in a position of first assistant to the office of such officer, or did not. Okay, so you can't put in somebody else as their assistant, like the day before, post date or pre date, or however. I guess you can't fake up. You're not supposed to fake up a date for a new assistant to be named, a new chief of staff to be named, supposedly the day before Sessions resigns, and then make that person the acting AG. Let's see. So basically there's a requirement that person have been there for a considerable period of time, at least 90 days. The president, let's see, anything else? I mean, there's a lot of garbage to be read here, but it doesn't look like it. Now I guess you should comb through it to see if there's anything that would somehow, anything esoteric that would disallow the appointment of Whitaker. It doesn't appear to be the case in my brief scan here. Let's see. Anything else here in Section C? The president, and only the president, may direct an officer nominated by the president for reappointment for an additional term to the same office in an executive department without a break in service. Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, I don't think that's applicable. And then the next section was 33, where there was a lot of reference to Section 3346, time limitations. But I don't know. Maybe we drop it at this point and say, okay, I think they probably got a new person in there before the time limitation expired. But just kind of curious. 210 days. I think that was discussed by a lot of people who were observing this thing and figuring that there had to be a attorney general in place sooner than 210 days from the date of the beginning of the vacancy, which again makes the beginning date of the vacancy important. And if this were to have come up, I think there was only, even if it was 4 months, 30, 60, 90, 120 days. So there's still plenty of time to come in under the wire there. But how would they settle it? If, for instance, if they left Whitaker in place for a year and somebody sues, right? You'd say, well, this is a violation of 5 U.S. Code Section 3346 that says it can't last, this acting service can't last longer than 210 days beginning on the date the vacancy occurs. And the Trump guys give you the Nick Sandman grin and say, I don't know when the vacancy occurred. His letter of resignation is undated. Could have been last week, not 211 days ago. Does that matter? Does the judge accept Wikipedia's entry? Does the judge accept Wikipedia's entry given that it's footnoted and there are reports in the contemporaneous press dating the resignation to November 7th, 2018? Does Trump's legal representation come and say, yeah, but that's fake news? Does the court say, I don't know, all I've got here is a newspaper purported to have been printed on November 8th, 2018, alleging that the supposed attorney general allegedly resigned on November 7th in an undated letter. So how far do you take it? I guess that's why this stuff is important. And I think it's everybody's sense of how often important legal questions get hung up on stupid stuff like this, which just, again, helps us, I guess, puts a finer point on the necessity of taking care of business in this office and really doing the work. I don't know. Michael Musson's comment here, I guess, really sums things up. I keep seeing reporting that Trump doesn't want chief of staff or thinks he can do it himself when he pretty clearly cannot. This is probably a good thing, though. I guess maybe in some ways it causes trouble for him. Anyway, we were going to transition last we made this attempt to the New York Times' coverage from Maggie Haberman of the upcoming Michael Cohen testimony. The headline grabbed my attention. Planned in Michael Cohen's testimony, a litany of accusations against Trump. I don't know whether he dated all of his materials, but we'll find out, I guess. So preview of what's expected when he next testifies. So what do we got here? Michael D. Cohen, President Trump's former personal lawyer and fixer, not in quotes, it just says fixer right out there, is planning on portraying his one-time client in starkly negative terms when he testifies Wednesday, that's tomorrow, before a House committee, and on describing what he says was Mr. Trump's use of racist language, I'm not sure how far that gets us, lies about his wealth, and possible criminal conduct. That sounds bad. Mr. Cohen's plans were laid out in broad strokes by a person familiar with what he intends to say in his testimony, and they indicate that Mr. Cohen will use documents, and his personal experiences to support his statements. I hope they're dated. In a statement on Tuesday morning, that would be today, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, denounced Mr. Cohen. Okay, good use of your time. Here's the announcement. Quote, disgraced felon Michael Cohen is going to prison for lying to Congress and making other false statements, she said. Sadly, he will go before Congress this week, and we can expect more of the same. It's laughable, and I did laugh, I admit that anyone would take a convicted liar like Cohen at his word, and pathetic to see him given yet another opportunity to spread his lies. Unquote. Mr. Trump and his allies have been preparing for days for Mr. Cohen's testimony, which will take place over several hours while the president is in Vietnam for a summit meeting, supposedly, with the North Korean leader, maybe, Kim Jong-un. The president's aides have been anxious about the effect that the testimony might have on him. They anticipate, though, that Republican allies on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform will aggressively question Mr. Cohen's credibility, I'm sure they will, trying to paint him as a liar and accusing him of fabricating stories to help his cause. Lanny Davis, a lawyer and advisor to Mr. Cohen, how do you get that job? I know, it's been a while. We've known that for a long time, but still, it's just remarkable every time we hear it. Well, he declined to discuss details of Mr. Cohen's testimony, saying only that Mr. Cohen worked very hard on this moment to not only tell the truth, but to back it up with documents. Mr. Davis and Mr. Cohen's response to questions about his truthfulness will be, I take full responsibility. I lied in the past. Now you have to decide if I'm telling the truth. That's the only thing he can say. I will say this. I don't know if we need to read the whole thing here. We can just wait for the real thing on Wednesday. I just want to point out that tomorrow we may very well see Republicans being the ones to take precisely the aggressive line on demanding the authentication of everything that Democrats ought to be taking with respect to Trump and everybody related to him. They'll be pushing that on Cohen, and I don't know that Democrats ever will get the message. We could be doing this to Trump, and we're not. And I really wish I had faith that they would wake up to that possibility and that necessity real soon. So, let's segue then out of that story this way by pointing out that while Trump is on his way to Hanoi to meet with Kim Jong-un, so is Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on his way to Hanoi for no particular reason. I think we might have mentioned this yesterday. He may just be there to annoy the rest of them. And that I think I noted for you yesterday, even if there's nothing going on, if I'm Vladimir Putin, I, would think it was funny to make people think that Trump was getting instructions from the Russian foreign minister during his supposed summit with the supposed leader of North Korea, allegedly, purportedly, supposedly, maybe, kind of, almost. You get the idea. Well, they've stepped up the trolling game, if nothing else. The headline of the AP piece noting the arrival of Lavrov, or the plans for Lavrov to head to Hanoi, is Russia, U.S. asks for advice on North Korea talks. It's not enough just to place Lavrov in Hanoi. They also want to plant the story, true or not, that the United States, and Donald Trump in particular, I guess, is interested in having the negotiations guided and informed by the Russians. I'm sure he'll deny that. I don't know whether he's denying it because it's true that he's not interested in their input or doesn't want their input or has the political sense to realize that their political input is dangerous and damaging for him domestically, or He just needs to deny it because otherwise it's more proof of collusion. Don't know. Couldn't tell you which one it is. Here's the story. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the United States has asked Moscow's advice in dealing with North Korea before a summit between President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader. And, actually, I guess we should point out, that would be a legitimate thing to ask for. And I'd feel better about it if it were a different administration. But would it be legitimate for an American administration to say, Russia, I'd like your input on this? Sure, you want to involve the big players in the international community, the other nuclear powers, the regimes which may have closer historical ties with the North Koreans, some diplomatic relations in the past with the North Koreans. Previously, American presidents have not had any relations at all, really, ordinarily with the North Koreans, for good reason. So I suppose you might want to involve the rest of the international community. But then, of course, the rest of the international community isn't there. It's just the Russians. So either Trump is unduly reliant on Russia for this, or Russians just want to make it look like he's unduly reliant on them. Lavrov, I shouldn't skip this one. Trump and Kim Jong-un are expected to meet on Wednesday and Thursday in Vietnam's capital. Their first meeting last summer ended without substantive agreements on North Korea's nuclear disarmament. I guess Trump disagrees with that, and he says everything was awesome and it was historical, the nature of their agreement. Lavrov, who was also visiting Vietnam this week, just happened to be here, said in comments carried by Russian news agencies on Monday that Russia believes that the U.S. ought to offer Pyongyang, quote, security guarantees for the disarmament deal to succeed. He also mentioned that, quote, the U.S. is even asking our advice, our views on this or that scenario of, unquote, how the summit in Hanoi could pan out. Don't know whether it's really happening. Just, that's what he's saying. And that's the end of the article, as a matter of fact. There's that little information in there. So I don't know whether that tends to prove one interpretation or the other in your mind. What do you think about that? I don't know what to make of it exactly. Just that it's out there, and I guess we ought to have a look. Let's see. How shall we transition now? How about this one here? CREW, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, have put out a report of their own, which might bear some review prior to the Cohen testimony, and certainly in the context of the greater Mueller probe and various other investigations. Their new report says Trump appears to have committed multiple crimes. That would be a bad thing for it to appear that a president had done, if he were in fact president, and I haven't seen the paperwork on that. There is compelling evidence that President Trump may have personally committed up to 8 criminal campaign finance and related offenses while running for president and during his first year in office, according to a report released yesterday by Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW for short. It's one of the few working acronyms that I've come across lately. In a new report, A Campaign to Defraud, that's the title, CREW combs through the facts behind these apparent crimes based on admissions by 2 of President Trump's likely co-conspirators and news reports detailing how criminal law can already be applied to publicly known facts. And we may have to do this ourselves if there is no Mueller report per se. Most of President Trump's potential violations are related to illegal campaign contributions meant to cover up evidence of Trump's affairs with 2 women, preventing voters from learning the truth about his behavior ahead of the election, though at least one continued well into his first year in office. So we know what that's about. The 8 criminal offenses, let me just be prepared here for our upcoming break. There we are. The 8 criminal offenses, including 7 felonies, potentially committed by Trump include causing American Media Incorporated to make and or accepting or causing his then lawyer Michael Cohen to accept an unlawful corporate contribution related to Karen McDougal. And I guess pretty much the same thing with respect to Stephanie Clifford, a.k.a. Stormy Daniels. We'll continue with this litany and a little bit more discussion of what it means after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. We'll continue with this list of possible criminal violations listed by Crew here, just so we don't miss any. There was the causing American Media Incorporated, AMI, to make and or accept, right, unlawful corporate contributions related to Karen McDougal. Then bullet point number 2 here among the 8, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points, but 8 criminal offenses. Here we go. The second bullet point includes 2 instances of causing Cohen to make and or accept, it says accepting, unlawful individual contributions related to Stephanie Clifford and 2015 online polling. Aha. Next up, 2 instances of causing Donald J. Trump for President LLC's failure to report contributions from AMI and Cohen related to McDougal and Clifford, causing Donald J. Trump for President LLC to file false reports with the Federal Election Commission. Next up, making a false statement by failing to disclose liability to Cohen for the Clifford payment on his 2017 public financial disclosure form. And lastly, conspiracy to defraud the United States by undermining the lawful function of the FEC and or violating federal campaign finance law related to hush money payments, false statements, and cover-ups of reimbursement payments to Cohen made by the Trump Organization. The balance of the press release here says there has already been significant attention to the president's possible exposure for obstruction of justice, but it is deeply troubling to discover that he also may have been personally involved in a whole other set of criminal offenses for causing or accepting illegal campaign contributions and then covering up those payments, said Crew Executive Director Noah Bookbinder. These potential offenses highlight a concerted effort by the president and those around him to deprive the American people of information relevant to making informed decisions, election decisions, severely eroding public trust. Now, we get the gist of this. This has already been out there, but it's interesting to see it laid out this way. And again, even if it remains unaddressed by any report at all from Robert Mueller or whatever he might actually put out there, we should remember there are actual campaign finance violations that have been pretty well proven by what's on the public record. And I guess there'll only be more in evidence after tomorrow's testimony from Cohen, whether you believe him or not. While violations of the Federal Election Campaign Act can be penalized with civil fines, more serious offenses such as unlawful campaign contributions or expenditures in excess of $25,000 made knowingly and willfully are felonies, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Trump's conduct appears to have been part of a deliberate effort to manipulate public opinion and to prevent damaging information about his past from coming to light and thus may trigger criminal penalties. The apparent personal participation of the president in a conspiracy to conceal key measures taken to support his candidacy should be a matter for careful consideration by prosecutors, Congress, and the American people, said Bookbinder. You can, of course, click through to read the entire report. I don't think we'll spend the time on that, although it's, of course, recommended reading for everyone. And that gives us an opportunity to ask another question that we didn't address yesterday or even at the end of last week when we were discussing the reemergence of the Epstein case in relation to, what it would mean for Alex Acosta, who still continues to serve, because I haven't seen any paperwork saying that he's left, and I don't know if I ever will see that paperwork, continues to serve as the Secretary of Labor. And by the way, it was pointed out over the weekend, well worth noting, especially in the wake also of the arrest of Robert Kraft, the head of the Patriots football organization, in what was alleged originally, anyway, in strong and really no uncertain terms, to be a sex trafficking case, although I understand that apparently the local authorities are backing off at least in the vehemence with which they are insisting that the women were in fact trafficked in all of this. And that's been a key point in a lot of the condemnation that's come down on him. And I saw a lot of people spend the first day or so after the news of the arrest, really it was probably compressed into a couple of hours, look, I don't care what Kraft does on his personal time, and they should even legalize sex work, but you can't have trafficked women doing this. That's not sex work. That's just slavery. And I see that. I get the point. I understand. So it's troubling then to see people backing off of the, really it was unequivocal, the allegation that the women had been trafficked here. It's like, can't we get this story right? It's bad news to have to back off of this at some point. I don't know what it means long term, but it does, those questions and that arrest and the looming problems for Acosta related to Epstein raised the question alongside these questions or these conclusions really reached by Crew that we're talking about actual felonies and I suppose therefore impeachable offenses as well, although could mean anything. That these crimes arise from the hush money payments involving American media and the National Enquirer, and payments made to silence women who could bring forth damaging information about Trump that might otherwise have cost him the election, and that apparently did deprive American voters of necessary information for making a proper decision about who to vote for in the election, although I assume that anybody that voted for Donald Trump was not going to have any of this information anyway. They were going to have no part of it. It does lead us to one other related question, which is there more here in these types of crimes outlined by the Crew memo? Is there a connection to the Epstein part of the case? He's making payoffs to cover up illicit affairs that he's making with women who voluntarily entered into those affairs with him. But at the same time that these stories are percolating to the surface and the Trump team is scrambling to cover them up and keep them out of the news, at that same time, similar accusations that likewise center on Trump's alleged sexual misconduct were surfacing that were much more damaging and much more serious, involving his friendship and continuing friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and the existence of lawsuits and charges of various kinds stemming from or coming from made by women, now adult women, who claim that Trump abused them or raped them when they were minors in connection with or at the behest of, at the direction of Jeffrey Epstein. Those are much more serious allegations than the, report that Stormy Daniels had, well, I guess what you would have to term consensual sex, although she may have had regrets after the fact, but it was consensual at the time, and so was McDougal's relationship with him. This is an entirely different category of offense. But you heard those stories. They did percolate to the surface, and we weren't sure what to make of them, and they disappeared rather quickly. And at least one of them, I understand, disappeared under some duress. The lawsuit alleging that from a woman who alleged that Trump had raped her when she was a minor at Epstein's direction, or having been introduced to Trump by Epstein, or that it even happened. I think Armando noted the allegation was that it had happened at Epstein's house. Is that right? As opposed to at Mar-a-Lago, where Epstein went to go trolling for his teenagers from time to time. Here's his note from the other day. Let's see. That it happened at the Epstein residence. Well, at any rate, those charges disappeared at a very fortuitous time for Trump, right in the middle of the election, right toward the end of the election. Stormy Daniels and others, Daniels most clearly, has always made as part of her story that she was threatened at some point to keep her mouth shut about these things, that there were explicit threats from somebody who told her to back off of Trump, or else something, horrible would happen and she'd get hurt. And when the lawsuit was, I guess the lawsuit was dropped at some point right before the election, and everybody kind of understood that I wouldn't be surprised if some threats had been made, whether physical threats or threats to, the legal process would go very poorly for the accusers and that their lives would be ruined. I don't think anybody had any trouble believing, or would have had trouble believing, that that was the case. But we didn't hear very much about it. But now that we know, we didn't know for sure then, but I'm sure everyone suspected. But now that we do know that during the very same period, there were hush money payments being made, including hush money payments being made to one woman, at least, who also said that she was threatened. And the fact that there was this potentially explosive case, mostly related to Jeffrey Epstein, but that could clearly be tied to Donald Trump, also disappeared at this very fortuitous moment. Also at a time when we knew not only were hush money payments being made, but that they were being, in some cases, filtered through and administered by American Media Incorporated and its gossip rags, like the National Enquirer, which sometimes gets stories about this particular subject, as a matter of fact, quite correct. But now that they were an active participant in covering up and killing those stories for Donald Trump, is there any relationship between the mysterious disappearance of the rape allegations, the mysterious memory holing of the Epstein case, the mysterious rise to prominence once again of Alexandra Acosta, rising, by the way, to the position of, as you know, Secretary of Labor? I forgot to make mention of the fact that trafficking was alleged in the Kraft case was also particularly important, because it is the Department of Labor, which Acosta heads, which has a fairly significant role to play in ferreting out, detecting, breaking up, and prosecuting trafficking rings, because, of course, it's slavery. That's a labor condition, and very often it's the outrageous, I guess you would call them, labor conditions, for lack of a better term, that establish whether or not this is something we consider to be trafficking in slavery. He's got a real role to play here. It's not as though he's, head of housing and urban development and only the most tenuous connection can be made, or that he's just enjoying some position of prominence as a reward for, I guess you could allege, as a reward for his cooperation in all this. But he actually administers a department that has a serious role to play in this very issue. And of course, we discussed last Friday, I think, how ridiculous it was for him to have gone from the big advocate for federal prosecution of such cases to, oh, well, actually, in this case, I don't think there's any federal role to play whatsoever. Anyway, I just wonder, and I think Greg speculated in the background at some point along with me, whether or not there was some discoverable connection between the nexus of using AMI for killing stories, using hush payments for keeping people quiet. The allegation, and at least one of the recipients of these hush payments was also physically threatened, and the disappearance all of a sudden, right before the election, of another potentially explosive set of accusations that actually had already in the public record a developed case and conviction in the person of Jeffrey Epstein that was easily connected to Trump by facts in the case. The fact that all of that went away at about the same time raises questions for congressional investigators to pursue, if not Robert Mueller, who may or may not be, quote unquote, done with his investigation. All right. Just wanted to put that one out there. There is much more, but not that much more time to get to all of this. But let me grab at least this article. This one requires a bigger segue, a bigger departure from what we're actually talking about at the moment, but also part of our overarching narrative. I saw it yesterday, and it was recommended to me by Kate Sherrill, who sends along the tweet of Sarah Kendzior in recommending it as well. So let's see. Here's what we got. The article in the Daily Beast. Let's open it up and make sure that we have it all correctly laid out in front of us. Iyad. Oops. Oh, it's I'm trying to read it, but the text has moved 99 times to accommodate all the pop-up ads. Iyad el-Baghdadi is the byline on this piece. How the Saudis, yes, really the Sauds, made Jeff Bezos, yes, he's just Jeff Bezos, public enemy number one. I don't know whether that's the public of the United States, the public enemy of Saudi-owned Arabia. I don't know exactly whether they've succeeded in any of this, but a look at inside the smear campaign that this writer for the Daily Beast alleges the Sauds, not the Saudis, there is no such thing really as Saudi people. They're just people whose lives are owned by the Saud family. And in this case, we're talking about the Saud family. How the Sauds made Jeff Bezos public enemy number one. Inside the 4-month campaign targeting the world's richest man. And I guess kudos to them for even being able to get such a headline in just 4 months. You would think that it would take longer and more money to target the world's richest man with something like this. Although I suppose if you are the second richest man, you could expect some pretty rapid results. Let's take a look. It sounded almost like a conspiracy theory, and that requires music. It sounded almost like a conspiracy theory when Jeff Bezos not so subtly hinted, remember this, that there might be a Saudi connection, a Saud connection really, to the attempt to strong-arm him with his below-the-belt selfies. But there's mounting evidence, language please, that the de facto ruler of the kingdom, that would be Mr. Bonesaw, has been trying to punish Bezos for the fierce coverage by his newspaper, the Washington Post, of the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Imagine that, right? I'm going to murder Jamal Khashoggi because he says bad things about my kingdom. It's not mine yet, but it's going to be. I'm the crown prince. Let's murder that guy. And they murdered him, and the newspaper covers the fact that you murdered him. And like, nah, now I got to get Jeff Bezos. Why don't you just not murder Jamal Khashoggi? Well, too late. Too little, too late. Wish I had thought about that. Now we can't murder Jeff Bezos. We have to smear him, and we have to do it now. Not only is he the world's richest man, but he owns a newspaper. This is going to be really tough. How are we going to do it? This effort began months prior to the aggressive approach by the National Enquirer's parent company. That would be the publication of the pictures and the attempt to blackmail him into what? They just want, and the National Enquirer had totally different reasons to be blackmailing him, unless they were doing it on behalf of the Saud family. I don't know. Let's see whether this gets established in here. Where's the evidence? Well, it's in plain sight. That's good. Let's review it. Along with a team of independent Arab experts and activists around the world, I have been closely monitoring the actions of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, commonly referred to as MBS, since his rise in 2015, and specifically his well-oiled online propaganda machine. Good, then you're the guy I want to read when it comes to this. Twitter's role in MBS's power grab is our first section here. There's a lot one can learn about what the Saudi leadership is thinking if one pays close attention to the narratives pushed and promoted by the extensive Twitter networks under its control. In fact, at the time of his murder, my friend, Jamal Khashoggi, sounds like a disclosure, which is fine, was working with us on a project to do exactly this, but the Crown Prince stopped him cold. He sure did. Twitter is huge. That's in italics, huge in Saudi Arabia, Saud-owned Arabia. The country boasts one of the world's highest rates of Twitter penetration. Yow. Because Saud-owned Arabia lacks a free press and bans political parties and NGOs, Saud-owned citizens, I guess we'll say, took to Twitter as their only outlet to discuss public matters. By 2015, Twitter had become the premier hangout of Saudi intellectuals, a critical public sphere often called the Parliament of the Arabs. I've never heard that, but I believe him. I bet he knows better than I do. This changed with the rise of MBS. Twitter's immense popularity led the Crown Prince and his advisors to conquer Arabic language Twitter and turn it from a space of public debate among citizens into one of the kingdom's primary tools of social control. Why? To prevent their biggest fear, Arab Spring-style dissent in Saudi Arabia. The proof for it being the kingdom's primary tool of social control is a link to a Washington Post article on the subject, and it is David Ignatius's December 7th piece, How a Chilling Saudi Cyber War Ensnared Jamal Khashoggi. By the end of 2018, returning to the Daily Beast, MBS's conquest of Twitter was complete. Prominent independent tweeters were in jail, in exile, compromised by blackmail, intimidated into silence, or dead. No longer was there such a thing as an independent voice within Saud-owned Arabia. You either had to stop being independent, stop having a voice, or stop being in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Twitter is now presided over by a closely controlled network of pro-government accounts. Political messages posted on it represent government-promoted narratives, not independent opinion. We have been tracking the government's social media program on our website. Their website, by the way, is ArabTyrantManual.com. Interesting enough. Here is a small sample of how it works. Are you ready for that? October 1st. Here is how MBS unleashed his electronic army on Bezos. October 1st. Digital security experts at Citizen Lab confirm the phone of Omar Abdulaziz, a Canada-based Saudi dissident who maintained close and daily contact with Jamal Khashoggi, was targeted using state-of-the-art cyber spying software. It is later revealed that digital communications between Abdulaziz and Khashoggi were being intercepted for several months ahead of this point. October 2nd, Jamal Khashoggi is last seen entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Soon, the Washington Post raises the alarm and demands answers from the Saudi government. October 7th, we know how this part goes. Turkey asserts that Khashoggi has been killed inside the Saudi consulate. The Post escalates its relentless coverage, demanding justice for Jamal. On the 15th, a hashtag linking Jeff Bezos to the Post's reporting appears on Saudi social media. Boycott Amazon. The first tweet with the hashtag proclaims, "To the people of the great kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the leftist Jeff Bezos is the owner of the Washington Post, the newspaper of evil and betrayal. We have to defend our country and boycott Amazon." Wow. The Washington Post publishes an op-ed by Turkish President Erdogan, and we'll just go right to that, whom the Saudi government accuses of politicizing Khashoggi's murder. November 3rd, a spike in anti-Bezos tweets begins in Saudi social media, showing clear signs of government manipulation. In addition to boycott Amazon, 2 additional hashtags are launched, one calling for the boycott of Souq.com, I'm guessing that's SOUQ.com. That's an Amazon-owned Middle Eastern e-commerce company. The initial tweet reads, "We as Saudis will never accept to be attacked by the Washington Post in the morning, only to buy products from Amazon and Souq.com by night. Strange that all 3 companies are owned by the same Jew, yes, who attacks us by day and sells us products by night." Yikes. But they love Israel. Don't worry about it. And let's give them some nuclear technology as well. They're on Israel's side, which is now, of course, run by a guy who has allied himself with the Israeli alt-right, ultra-extremist crazies. And don't worry about it because something Iran. Anyway, November 4th, several news outlets notice the calls to boycott Amazon on Saudi social media, and at least one points to clear signs of manipulation. That's a linked assertion as well. November 5th, the Washington Post publishes an op-ed titled, "It's Time to Halt Business in Saudi Arabia." November 9th, a prominent MBS surrogate revives calls to boycott Amazon and Souq.com, using a screen grab of the above op-ed to make his point. This is followed by another surge in anti-Bezos tweets. Also November 9th, the Washington Post publishes an op-ed by Mohammed Ali al-Houthi, the leader of the Houthis, the rebel group in the Saudi-led coalition. The Saudi-led coalition has been fighting in Yemen since 2015. I think I should look into that and then maybe figure out how that's pronounced. November 10th through the 19th. Large and sustained spike in anti-Bezos tweets as 3 more hashtags are launched, including "The owner of Amazon and Souq is attacking us," and "Bezos threatens us while Souq.com trades with us." This time, the surge includes graphics, cartoons, and videos disparaging Bezos. A cartoon of Bezos seemingly running away from a shoe-throwing, insult-hurling Saudi citizen. The cartoonist made sure to depict Bezos holding a copy of the Washington Post with an op-ed of the Houthi leader on its front page. Several videos appear describing Bezos' relationship with the Post and calling for a boycott. One video says, "Bezos is a spiteful, racist person against our country and trying to destabilize us." A graphic with a picture of Bezos is captioned, "This is the hateful filth," and describes him as, quote, "spearheading the media attacks in Saudi Arabia, specialized in defaming our reputation in the world," among other things. Another graphic entitled, "The Jew, Jeff Bezos," links Bezos to the Washington Post, Amazon, and Souq.com. Note, though Jeff Bezos isn't Jewish, claiming public figures are Jewish in order to tie them to all sorts of nefarious activities is a well-known anti-Semitic trope. It's not a trope, it's the regular anti-Semitism, but I get you. Anti-Bezos hashtags died down for a while after this point, until on January 10th, the National Enquirer publishes its special issue dedicated to revealing Bezos' affair. MBS surrogates immediately engage in schadenfreude. noting Jeff Bezos has incited against Saudi Arabia and its leadership for weeks via his Washington Post, and now he's been struck by a marital infidelity scandal that will cost him half his fortune in a divorce. In brief, whoever earns Saudi Arabia's enmity will be broken, disparaged, and ended by God. Something tells me it wasn't divine intervention. There's actually much more to the article we won't be able to get to, but that gives you a good taste for what's going on. I encourage you to read on, and I encourage you as well to stay tuned for Justice Putnam's program, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next. Lots coming up, lots that we didn't get to, including more from national security experts on the arrest of the crazy Coast Guardsman. We'll have to check that out. Stay tuned.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More big news that we missed. ICE says an infant who died when a detained immigrant went into early labor doesn't really count as a death. The North Carolina State Court handed down a stunningly aggressive attack on illegal gerrymandering, and a Russian media executive who mocked Putin as an evil gnome has conveniently committed suicide.